I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interview with Joe Vogel for Congress in Maryland's 6th District. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics, a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse, democratic, and sometimes divided societies. As part of the show, we have conversations with local, state, and sometimes federal candidates. Rather than ask how they stand on a multitude of issues, these conversations go in depth on a few issues and reveal the character of the candidates. Mail-in ballots for the upcoming May 14th primary are out. Early voting starts May 2nd. There are 3 congressional districts in Maryland where incumbents are not running. District 2 up by Baltimore, District 3 that centers around Howard and Anne Arundel County, and District 6, which starts in Montgomery and goes all the way to the mountains of western Maryland. The primary election for Maryland's 6th District has a crowded field. Among the leading candidates is Joe Vogel, a first-term state delegate from Montgomery County. You can find interviews with other candidates in the I Hate Politics library, available on all major streaming platforms. Music for this episode are 2 short piano pieces from Kensington resident Adam Bobrow. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. Joe Vogel, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are running for Congress from Maryland's District 6, and you've wanted to talk about economic development. Can you start with the scope of the problem, particularly as it applies to Maryland District 6?
So, look, this is a challenge that I've been grappling with in the legislature. And as I travel across the district, the challenges, depending on where we go, differ. But across the board, I think we are punching below our economic potential. And we have a lot of communities in this district, especially as you get out further west, that have really been devastated by the changing economy. The loss in manufacturing jobs, the closure of the Luke paper mill in Allegheny County, for example, that loss in jobs, we have to recognize that when you lose jobs, it's not just about that income. It's about that community and the purpose that comes with employment. And you know, one element to this that I am deeply concerned by as we get our briefings here in the state legislature on the state of our economy. We're all very excited about our unemployment rate, but we have to recognize that we have a real problem when it comes to our labor force participation rate. We have a real problem when it comes to the rate of business growth and business creation and job creation here in our state. And those are challenges that I think really impact the 6th congressional district that I'd be hoping to deal with on a federal level as well. The full closure was, I believe, 2021, late 2021. Maryland's unemployment rate is right now the lowest in the nation. And there was just an Axios piece that was written on this the other day that coincides pretty nicely with our interview. And I was reading it this morning while sitting on the House floor. And it matches what the concerns that I raised during our briefing on the state of the economy in my Ways and Means Committee just a few weeks ago. We have a real problem with labor force participation. We are not recovering from the pandemic at the rate of other states. And we have a labor force participation that I consider to be significantly lower than that of before the pandemic.
Can you explain what labor force participation means, what it was before the pandemic, and what it is now?
So labor force participation is the percentage of Marylanders who are engaging and willing to participate in our economy, right? The unemployment rate is the number of Marylanders, or the percentage of Marylanders who don't have work that are seeking work, right? But the other number there that's also critical is looking at how many Marylanders are either unable to work, or not willing, or not able to engage in the economy, in the labor market for whatever reason. So we do have to consider those two numbers.
Correct. So just to clarify, the denominator for the labor force participation rate is larger than the denominator in calculating the unemployment rate. And so there are people who don't work, won't work, can't work, that may not be in the unemployment denominator, especially if those conditions are long term. Is that correct? Your argument is a lot of Marylanders who could work are not working. So what is the number before pandemic? What is the number after pandemic? What is the rate of recovery? And what is your concern?
The good news is that we are seeing a recovery, and we are still slightly ahead of the national average. Our recovery, though, has been slower than the national average. We were looking before the pandemic at a labor force participation rate of somewhere around 69%. Now we're close to 65%. I think now just above 65%. So that's still 4 percentage points lower than we were pre-pandemic levels.
Do you understand why that difference exists? I mean, that difference could be many things. For example, it could be that Marylanders are better off and retiring, and that wouldn't be surprising because we are also an aging state.
And the aging population is a piece of this. Marylanders who are individuals who are leaving the state of Maryland, that's also...
So in fact, a lower labor participation rate due to retirement may just be good news of people, finishing up their careers.
Well, there's other factors here. And when you start looking at the demographic breakdown, you start to see some concerning trends. Women in particular have been far slower at re-entering the labor force. And that is, we consider a key reason for that to be the lack of affordable childcare. Maryland ranks as in the top 10 costliest states for childcare. We've been working here in the legislature to address the cost of childcare. But two other pieces to this, which I consider to be extremely concerning, is when it comes to physical and mental health. Maryland has ranked among the top 10 states with the worst impacts from opioid-related deaths and the substance use disorder crisis. And we have a real challenge when it comes to a mental health care crisis and lack of access to mental health care. And if you look at the comptroller's report and different surveys that they cite, they look at childcare, mental health, and opioid-related deaths, opioid overdose-related deaths, as potential factors in the decline in labor force participation that we're seeing in Maryland.
You are positing a difference between the unemployment rate and the labor participation rate. Women are not re-entering the labor force because of affordable childcare. But childcare was also fairly expensive in Maryland prior to the pandemic.
And COVID caused even greater challenges with our childcare system. Look, I think the way to think about this is not just what the challenges are, but what the opportunity is and what the vision for our economy is.
To what extent do you think these general state programs, including childcare, actually has an impact in your district? In a sense that, some of these programs, best as I know, are, aimed at Baltimore. Some of them are aimed at the more populous parts of the state. You have some very populous parts of the state in your district, no doubt. But you also have fairly rural areas in your district. within the blueprint, right, there's an expansion of pre-K programs. Are you seeing uptake, people, childcare providers signing up for the state's pre-K program?
It's pretty clear, right, that the same challenges that you're seeing everywhere else you're experiencing in some of the more populous areas here, but in the rural areas, those challenges are even more significant. There is, under the blueprint, there's proposals right now to provide some extra funding for some of those more rural districts. I raised the question that I don't. Again, we're in a tight budget environment, but I don't think that those that extra spending is enough, right? You go to schools in Garrett County, and because of a number of different challenges, they are having to close schools, which means that students are going to have to, get on a bus and drive 45 minutes across the county to get to school. And so that's, there are challenges like that we're seeing in some of the more rural communities when it comes to our education system. I also think, I visited the Career and Tech Readiness Center in Frederick County, the Frederick Innovation Center. I mean, they are that kind of investment there. And if they can, there's an effort to further expand that program and further expand that space and build out a second center. I mean, those career readiness programs have the potential to create really transformative change. One that I'm most intrigued by, and I think I'm visiting again in a couple months here, is the Teachers Academy at the Frederick CTC, where they're taking high school students and setting them on a track to be able to be educators, which we know that we have a shortage of.
Are there other investments you're seeking within the district, Maryland 6?
There's a number of them, right? There's a big bill right now that the governor's pushing for more innovation that's specifically targeted in the Baltimore area. But I'm a big believer that some of those startups and new businesses, not just startups, but new businesses generally, that can start anywhere. And I saw that the FITCI, the Frederick Innovation Center they're starting new businesses in Frederick, but I believe that at Allegheny Community College, at Frostburg State, and at Hagerstown Community College, we could have new businesses emerging.
You could. Why don't you?
Well, that's where we have to bring those same investments that we're seeing in these innovation hubs. We have to continue bringing them.
But what do they look like?
Well, there's a number of different iterations of it, but I think what you're seeing now in the Baltimore region with this big investment, I would like to see that in the rural parts of the state as well, and I'm a big proponent of that. But then there's, I've visited so many small and growing businesses in the western part of this district, and I visited one recently that they have 200 employees. They're looking for a couple $1 million in either government investment or private investment. They could turn that to 400. And when that's in Allegheny County, if you're looking in Allegheny County, that growth is significant, right? So we have to continue in one of the roles that I see as a member of Congress is continuing to incentivize that kind of investment in both government investment and private investment in the western part of our district. Continuing to invest in our community colleges and bringing some of those innovation programs to our community colleges, continuing to invest in our career and technology preparation programs like the one that you have in Montgomery County, like the one that you have in Frederick, all across. And I think we will see significant growth, but in significant job creation and significant business creation. But we have to make sure that those investments aren't just happening in certain parts of our state, but are happening across our state.
Sure. What I don't understand about Garrett in particular is that Garrett has Deep Creek.
Yes.
Which is such a big economic engine.
Right.
So why are they having to close schools? I mean, I can understand Allegheny. I can perhaps even understand Washington. But do you have a sense of that?
Well, I think it's a number of factors, right? One is declining student population. What you also are seeing in Garrett County, which actually relates to the point that you're making on Deep Creek, is a surge in home prices. And we haven't even touched on housing costs, transportation costs, or on housing costs and transportation infrastructure. But you go out there, and the statistic that I heard that blew my mind is that a home that's for sale there is, I believe it was 8 times what an average family living there can afford, because you have a lot of folks coming from the DC area and other parts of the country and building these very nice homes there. But what you're still missing there, as you are across the state, is attainable, that missing middle tier of housing.
But also the property taxes out of Deep Creek should be high enough that all these problems should just be taken care of themselves. No?
The declining student population is also significant because
that's a different kind of problem, and I can understand that. But they can also say that we will run schools with fewer students if they have the money.
Right, and that is, I am not a Garrett County school administrator. I understand the challenges that they're facing, but I think from a practical standpoint, I think the idea of having students have to ride across the county on a snowy day to get to school is impractical and dangerous, right? So I've had these conversations with them already, and I know that there's been a lot of pushback against the closure of schools, and I'm glad to hear that now they've delayed that. But we have to continue making sure that they have the resources to adjust to what is a declining student population and other challenges out there that are unique to more rural school districts in a state where we have a lot of rural areas, but I think that oftentimes those challenges aren't fully accounted for. When I'm a member of Congress, my top priority is going to be bringing back those federal investments for my district. But it's not just because I think that that is what's good politically, but I think making those investments is good for the prosperity of the entire state and the entire country. If we can grow new businesses here, if we can improve the quality of life here, if we can make our schools better here, we can make our roads better here, ultimately, right, from an economic standpoint, the whole state is benefiting and the entire country is benefiting. So, I'm going to look to continue investing in projects that I consider to have significant potential for long-term social growth and economic growth.
You mentioned health clinic. One of the things I had heard about Western Maryland in particular was that there was going to be an abortion clinic to serve folks coming from neighboring states. What is going on with that? Where are we? Is it functioning? Is it, can you give us an update?
So I was there for its grand opening a few months ago. It's in Crescent Town, just about 15, 20 minutes away from Cumberland, Maryland. And it was a clinic that was originally in West Virginia. And when West Virginia criminalized abortion, they moved. The clinic is literally across the street from West Virginia, right? Which just, I think, points out the absurdity of this whole thing, and these just abhorrent attacks on reproductive freedom that we're seeing in states across the country. I have a bill in response to what they're and the clinic is open, and they're providing healthcare services to Marylanders in Western Maryland, which has been in need of reproductive healthcare clinics. They're also providing gender affirming care there. And they're providing services to women from other states that are coming in, and thanks to the laws that we passed in Maryland last year, making Maryland a safe haven and protecting the privacy of patients here in Maryland, they're able to provide that care. One challenge that they continue to face, and I actually visited an abortion clinic nearby in Hagerstown yesterday morning. And they're facing similar challenges, which is that there has been a surge in violence against abortion clinics, intimidation of patients. And so I have a bill this session that would provide grants similar to the grants that we see for nonprofits and religious institutions for security to those abortion clinics to make the necessary infrastructure improvements to keep the clinic safe.
I want to get back to the question of economic development, and in particular, the comptroller's report on the state of the economy that identified housing as a key constraint on economic growth. How are you thinking about the problem, and what are your preferred solutions?
I want to see us especially tackle the demand for missing middle tier housing that I think would create pathways to attainable housing, affordable housing for folks across our state. One area that I'll mention that I'm uniquely focused on is as I speak to our educators. Right, last year I came to the legislature and sponsored legislation to address the burden of student debt facing mental health professionals, because I'd heard from so many Maryland, from so many educators and so many mental health professionals in our public schools, that was the greatest or one of the greatest burdens that they were facing. Now, as I speak to educators, the lack of access to affordable housing, or housing that not even housing that they can purchase, right? Because a lot of the programs that exist now are so that teachers can buy homes. But if you are a younger teacher, a teacher that's straight out of school and starting to work in our schools, the cost of housing is out of reach for you. So I'm actually sponsoring legislation to create a statewide task force to explore different solutions for specifically educator workforce housing. This is going to create, when we go back to the issue of the economy, if we can't address the challenges around housing, if we can't have sufficient workforce housing, if we are making our educators drive 45 minutes to get to the schools they're teaching at 6 a.m, if we have our police officers and firefighters who are living 3 counties away, right? I had a ride along in Montgomery County with firefighters. They all live in Carroll County because they can't afford to live here. I mean, that is ridiculous.
That's only partly true, because their swing shifts allow them to move further and further away. Teachers is a different problem, I agree. But a lot of firefighters and police officers who have swing shifts live in different counties, because they can come in at 4 a.m. one day, stay for a long period of time, and then go home. So they're coming in maybe 2 days a week. So that's a different calculation.
Well, I think across the board, I think we want, and this is back to the point that I made initially, and I'm by no means a housing expert.
I think housing is something that holds back economic development. The comptroller's report has identified it. You agree with the comptroller's report. You are in a position to help with housing. What is your solution? Well,
I've had these conversations with the secretary, and I've had these conversations with legislators who I would consider to be, there are a number of different issues that we grapple with. I've had these conversations with legislators who are focused on the issue of housing, and I will continue to support legislation that closes that gap of missing middle housing, that expands the number, that expands the stock of housing across the state. And I do the same thing in Congress, making those investments, but also advancing policies that would allow for us to more rapidly deploy housing infrastructure that we need.
Joe Vogel, thank you for taking the time. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
That's Maryland State Delegate Joe Vogel, who is running for Congress in Maryland's 6th District, which goes from Montgomery County in the south all the way to the mountains of Western Maryland. You can find him at joevogel.org. Music for this episode comes from Kensington resident Adam Bobrow. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll listen, like, and share the show as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. Mail-in ballots are out. Early voting starts May 2nd. Primary day is May 14th. See you next time.